that virtual briefing.
Press conference. I thought it's important this evening, notwithstanding the short notice, to brief South Africans on what is the situation at Eskom, what are the efforts that we are making in order to get out of load shedding, to normalize the electricity situation, and the special arrangements that have been made in order to work or ensure that the elections are run successfully by ourselves, on the one hand as a supporting entity and by the IEC itself. So firstly, let me say that for the last few days, I've been in touch with the Eskom management, and earlier today, I met with the Eskom board and the Eskom management. And as we stand, we are at level 4 because of the breakdown in a number of units at Eskom's generation plants. But secondly, also because of delays in the return of units that have been the subject of maintenance work that have not come back successfully. What we can now tell you as a result of intensive discussions is that the following is likely to happen over the next few days. The first is that overnight, some 2,000 megawatts of power will be returned to operations. And as a result, it is expected that the system will be downgraded from a level 4 load shedding to level 3 load shedding. Then over tomorrow and Friday, a few more thousand units will be put back onto the system as a result of plants returning to operations, and that will result in a downgrade from level 3 to level 2. And over the weekend, load shedding, I'm told by the Eskom management, will stop, which means that as South Africans go to the polls on Monday, and as the counting of votes proceeds both on Monday evening and over the next few days, there will be no load shedding unless there is some unexpected event, which I'm assured by the board and the Eskom management is an unlikely event. So Eskom and ourselves as government are doing everything possible to ensure that the elections are not disrupted in any way. And as I will point out to you in a moment, a number of contingency measures have also been put in place in cooperation with the IEC itself. So secondly, let me cover the question of the IEC. Firstly, I've met the CEO and other senior colleagues from the IEC, and the Eskom head of distribution this afternoon. And the following are some of the facts that South Africans should be aware of, which I'm sure you might have heard from the IEC itself. South Africa, on voting day, which is the 1st of November, will have 23,148 voting stations in the country. After 23,148 voting stations, 16,000 voting stations are in areas that are supplied with electricity by Eskom. The IEC has also itself procured 14,000 lighting equipment for the various voting stations that are outside of Eskom's supply areas. The 16,000 voting stations have been divided by Eskom's distribution division into a number of clusters throughout the country. And each of the clusters will have, amongst other things, generators and technicians who are on standby in order to assist the IEC at any voting station where there might be difficulties that actually emerge. In addition, the IEC informs us that they have 10 major result centers in the country. The one that all of us are familiar with, which is based in Pretoria, which is the National Results Center. And there are 9 provincial result centers across the 9 provinces in South Africa. Each of these result centers has a generator or generator capacity in the event that something untoward actually occurs. In addition to that, the IEC has 240 what are called capturing sites, where the counts from various voting stations are placed on record. And many of these actually operate from municipal complexes in different parts of the country. And each of these facilities have their own generators as well. The scanners that we are used to as South Africans when we go to vote are all pre-charged, informed by the IEC, and have a 12-hour battery life. In addition to that, the Eskom colleagues have also set up a liaison mechanism, which has already been in operation between Eskom and the IEC for some time now. Eskom senior colleagues will be based at the National Results Center in Pretoria, in addition to having a number of officials that are on standby in different parts of the country to assist the elections process wherever this becomes necessary. So there are 310 customer network centers as far as Eskom is concerned that provide services on any electricity-related matters, and over 100 mobile generators have been made available by Eskom through these different clusters that are in operation, so that they can be deployed appropriately at any of the voting stations that are part of the various clusters. So from the information that has been made available to us, it's clear, firstly, that the elections process will not be disrupted by a lack of electricity supply. Secondly, that load shedding will be over during the course of the weekend, and the 1st of November and 1 or 2 days after that, we can assure South Africans via Eskom's assurances that there will be no load shedding as well. And clearly, this is a major concern for all political parties and the South African public as well. And certainly, as Eskom itself has done, we want to apologize to South Africans and the various political parties for any anxiety that might have been caused in the course of this process. The second aspect, over and above the recovery from load shedding and the kind of cooperative mechanism that has been set up between the IEC and Eskom, is the measures that are now being taken within Eskom itself to ensure that the objectives that I've just outlined are actually achieved. Firstly, over the next few days, both diesel, which becomes quite important in the course of ensuring that the lights are on, and what I call the pump stations, which are used to also supply a significant number of megawatts to the system, are in a shape by the weekend to back up the coal-powered power stations in any shape or form that actually might be required. Secondly, it's quite clear that within Eskom itself, further expertise is required, and the board has been instructed this afternoon to take whatever measures are necessary in order to bring in the necessary expertise to back up the existing management teams at all levels in Eskom and ensure that the proper level of professionalism and of engineering rigor is applied within the Eskom environment. Why is this necessary at this point in time? Not only are there sort of faults that are outside of the control of Eskom in some instances, but in other instances, human error also plays a role. So let me take South Africans into confidence by saying there is one example at one power station where a particular piping was leaking. The light which signals that there is a fault in this particular pipe was flashing, and the operator ignored that signal for a reasonable amount of time. In other words, did not act immediately when those signals were being relayed. And as a consequence, a whole unit was lost, and somewhere around 600 to 700 megawatts was lost to the system. The next morning, the Eskom management tells me that this individual was fired. And the point we are making here is that this kind of lackadaisical approach and lack of rigor and diligence and vigilance by anybody within the Eskom establishment is unacceptable, and that there must be appropriate consequence management where we come across these sorts of occurrences. The second clearly is that there are very elaborate processes as far as procurement is concerned, which in emergencies like this impact quite severely on many of the state-owned entities, and in this particular instance, Eskom. It is possible to have the necessary checks and balances to ensure that there's no corruption taking place, and at the same time ensure that the parts that are necessary and the expertise that is required can be obtained far more speedily than is currently the situation. So the necessary approaches will be made within the next 24 hours to the National Treasury to ensure that the appropriate exemptions are granted in order for Eskom to be able to acquire the expertise or services and the parts that might actually be required. In addition to this, it's quite clear that the electricity system and energy system in South Africa urgently requires more megawatts to be on the system. This is something that we've been talking about for the last 2 years at least, and it is now urgent that all those parties that are responsible for ensuring that we utilize gas or ensure that the right amount of private investment takes place in producing more megawatts in the country must be speeded up with a greater sense of urgency than we've demonstrated at this particular point in time. Finally, just to reinforce the point of the performance by power station managers and operators, this afternoon, the board and the senior management of Eskom have talked about and will shortly introduce new provisions which will ensure that pay within the Eskom environments at certain levels of management will be directly related to performance. In other words, if your particular power station is not performing at the rate that is required, or it is capable of performing, then the necessary consequences must actually follow. The chief executive and other senior managers within Eskom will also ensure that there are senior people on the ground. They have been doing this over the recent and past, but more of this needs to happen to instill the right kind of urgency and vigilance at all levels of Eskom, particularly at the power station level. We must also be quite vigilant at a board and management and staff level of any external interference that might be brought to bear on the Eskom operations at this particular point in time. The one appeal I want to make to all of us is that whilst we are approaching an important democratic process as far as the elections are concerned, Eskom should not be treated as a political football. Whatever our frustrations are, and I'm certainly frustrated as well, with the performance of the coal-powered stations, it's important that we focus on getting the operations right at Eskom. It's important that we focus on going beyond load shedding. And I can assure you that over the next few days, everything possible will be done to ensure, as I've indicated earlier on, that there is no load shedding on election day and possibly on the days leading up to the election day as well. And in addition, and I repeat, extraordinary measures will have to be taken in order to find the appropriate support that Eskom requires in order to fulfill its function, and at the same time, a higher level of vigilance, urgency, and rigor is going to be required both of management and staff at Eskom itself. So with that assurance, we will try to keep you updated on a daily basis as to what progress is being made within the Eskom environment. And we can assure you that both at a government level and within the Eskom board and management, everything possible will be done to achieve the objectives that I have set out, and in particular, to ensure that the elections are an absolute success. Thank you very much. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Minister. Andre, do you want to add anything, or should I go to questions?
Let's just take the questions, Richard, and then we can see what...
Colleagues, we're opening for questions. Can I see those hands? Samkelo Maseko, I see you. Can you go ahead, Samkelo? I'll take others. Antoinette, you will be number 2. Amanda Watson, you'll be number 3. And Carol Payton, you'll be number 4. Thank you, colleagues. Samkelo?
Good afternoon, Minister, and good afternoon to the Eskom CEO. Samkelo Masabi here from the SABC. Minister Gordhan, in 2019 December, the president had to cut his trip short from Egypt and come back overnight on an unprecedented stage 6. In January of 2020, the deputy president said the Eskom executives had misled the president. Yourselves, you were there in that briefing when the president was allegedly misled, in the words of Deputy President David Mabuza, on what caused stage 6, on the sabotage. For how long can South Africans tolerate the failures of the power utility to ensure energy security in the country? Mr. Gordhan, you've been at the helm now for quite some time of public enterprises. Are you simply, with Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, failing when it comes to the core business of the power utility, which is energy generation? For how long will you continue apologizing to the nation on the bare failures of Eskom to ensure energy generation? If you are failing, why don't you just submit your resignation and give the job to the next best person who's going to resolve the energy crisis? 2, on the capacity of Eskom, Eskom fired people whom had history of energy generation. They may have been bad at corporate governance, the likes of Majela Koko. Are you simply admitting that you don't simply have the capacity when it comes to the engineering personnel, when it comes to the core business of the power utility to ensure energy generation, as you don't have enough heads of generation to ensure that this is done? 3, you are going into elections. Are you not decampaigning your own political home, the ANC, with the failures of Eskom led by Andre Director by this stage 4 of load shedding? I mean, the governing party now has to shift around their own Siyangoba rally because there will be load shedding at Eskom on Friday when your president is supposed to take to the podium to deliver the ANC Siyangoba rally. When can we as South Africans expect your resignations as Andre Director and Pravin Gordhan, as opposed to firing people at a lower level, yet the both of you as well are seemingly failing when it comes to energy security? Matriculants started their exams today. They don't have electricity to study.
Thanks, Samkelo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, please, let's keep our questions to a minimum of 2. There's a lot of colleagues who wants to also ask the questions. Minister, can I take the 3 others before you? Antoinette, yes. Second. Antoinette?
Sorry, Richard, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. It's Antoinette Slavers from Rapport. Minister, thank you for the briefing. Just 2 things. You mentioned something about external interference into Eskom's operations. What did you mean there? If you can just explain, please. And then the other thing is, you're talking about a direct link between performance and remuneration for especially power station managers. Isn't that more or less the system that Mr. Koko introduced that I believe was scrapped after he left? Maybe you can just clarify that. Thank you.
Thanks, Antoinette. Amanda, and then Carol, you'll be the last person for this first round. Thanks. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you, Richard. Minister Gordhan, Amanda Watson from the Citizen here. People have just come out of hard lockdowns which hurt them in their businesses, and now they're getting load shed. Maybe for many elections are the furthest things from their minds right now as they try to save their business. What would you like to say to them?
Carol, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Minister, for the briefing. Firstly, could you tell me, as a member of the ANC government, do you accept any responsibility at all for the state that Eskom's plant is in? And secondly, as a member of that government, do you accept any responsibility for the fact that since December 2019, absolutely not one single megawatt has been added to the grid? And that is because the plan has actually is snarled up and is not happening. Do you accept any responsibility for that? And then thirdly, to Mr. Director, if you could just confirm, are you going to be reducing your planned maintenance over the next week, or are you sticking with basically your 5 gigawatts of planned maintenance? And sorry, again to Mr. Gordhan,
Carol,
quite bold. I'm sorry, it's a very bold promise of you to say no load shedding, and other people have been tripped up by this before. Are you planning to blame Eskom if there is load shedding? Thanks.
Thanks, colleagues. Please, I beg colleagues to just keep it to 2 questions. There's others. Lindo Gute, Spiwe. I'll come back to you guys. Sophie Mukwena, I also see you guys. I'll come back to you guys on the second round. Minister, please.
Thank you very much for the questions. So let's start with Ms. Payton. I don't think the issue here is about blaming or not blaming. The issue is to state the facts as they are and to take the public into confidence about what the real state of affairs is. And I think Ms. Payton, perhaps more so than most that have asked questions so far, is very aware, as the South African public would be as well, that Eskom was a prime target of corruption and state capture, particularly by some of the people that have been mentioned. And state capture didn't just mean, and I've said this on many occasions, the stealing of money or the manipulation of contracts. The evidence before the Zondo Commission has shown that there's been far-reaching damage to the institution, both in terms of the previous operations of the institution, and in this particular regard, those who think that a great job was done during the earlier years when both fear on the one hand and perks on the other hand were used to drive the plant to a point where we have to now spend lots of money and lots of time and lots of effort to recover from that period, then we've got something to actually think about. Whilst Mr. Director will come back to you on planned maintenance, I think in a period like this, you have to manage both planned and unplanned maintenance in a way in which we meet the ultimate target of ensuring that there's enough megawatts available to keep the country going. Your third point was not a single megawatt has been added to the power system. You're absolutely right, except that since that time, there have been developments as far as the Siri wind farm is concerned, various bid rounds, bid windows of the IPP renewables have been added on, except that, as you would know, when you install renewables, what is dispatchable, as the engineers would say, is quite different from the number that you see as far as potential megawatts that the installation is capable of. So there have been some megawatts added, but certainly not adequate. And that doesn't fall within the domain of either myself or Eskom itself. And as I said in my opening remarks, it's very clear that we need to move with a far greater sense of urgency in order to ensure that at the minimum, 6,000 to 10,000 megawatts must be added as a matter of urgency to the power system in South Africa. Do we accept responsibility for the state of the plant? So this response not only to yourself, but to others as well. I don't operate the plant. I communicate to you what is said to me by the Eskom management and the board. And of course, I don't accept that on an uncritical basis. And they are asked tough questions about assurances given and assurances broken. So all I can do right now is to say to you, this is the information I've had. This is the information that has been pressure tested. And it's my responsibility to convey this to you as best I can. And if we are right, well, excellent. Then we have a good few days ahead of us and the elections will be a success. But where you're absolutely right, Ms. Payton, is that far more needs to be done as far as the energy system in South Africa is concerned, in order to reach a point where we have energy security, which will give rise to unfettered economic growth, but also the assurances, as Amanda has been asking, to businesses, that their businesses won't be interrupted by load shedding in any kind of way. So I certainly have every empathy for businesses that had difficulties as a result of various lockdowns. But those lockdowns, as you now know from international experience, were absolutely critical. And the South African government and the president in particular is praised in many parts of the world for having acted decisively to save as many lives as possible, to work as hard as possible to get hold of vaccines, which have been invaluable. And it's up to South Africans and all of us, by the way, to ensure that more and more South Africans take the opportunity to become vaccinated so that sooner rather than later, we have 70% of the population vaccinated. But we will do, again, everything possible to ensure that businesses are not impacted negatively. But as we stand right now, we do have a very constrained energy system in South Africa. Antoinette, I missed the first part of what you said, but your references to performance and remuneration, I'm not sure what obtained in the past, but Mr. Director can respond to that if need be. To Samkelo, congratulations on a wonderful political speech. And it's quite clear that you think that state capture was a good thing, that it served South Africa well. I disagree with you totally. From the evidence available, the people who were in management before have done the things that they have done, both in respect of benefiting themselves, but also destroying vital institutions such as Eskom, in a way in which it's taken us so many years to recover from the kind of damage that has been caused. And that's why I made reference to earlier on to external interference. There are still those who have no association with Eskom whatsoever now, who wouldn't mind tweeting about documents that they have access to or information that they have access to. And what point they're trying to make, I don't know. Because they've moved out of Eskom, they should stay out of Eskom's business and let the Eskom management do their best to recover from the disaster that they've actually left behind. And the references to 2019, 2020, and so on have been clarified during that particular period, that there might have been some mistakes in the way in which the then Eskom management might have communicated some information, but the lesson since then is quite clear, that there are some aspects of the generation system that are within the control of management and people who operate at our power stations, and there are some aspects that are not within their control. And what I was trying to communicate earlier is that that which is under the control of both the management and staff of Eskom must be performed at a much higher level of diligence and urgency and vigilance than we have seen up to this particular point in time. So for the rest of your political statement, Mr. Samkelo, we'll leave that for another day when you and I can have a chat about that. Richard?
Andre, do you want to answer some of the Carol's questions?
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening, Minister Gordhan, and also everyone on the call. Just to deal with Antoinette's question about external interference, I think what we're referring to here is not necessarily deliberate acts of sabotage, but we are talking about criminal activities, including cable theft, as well as various criminal activities that still continue to hamper our operational stability at a number of our power stations. And this is an unfortunate fact. And we really wish to urge the law enforcement agencies to step up their assistance to Eskom in bringing the perpetrators of these activities to book. It is absolutely crucial that we do so. In terms of the performance pay that and the performance management system that prevailed during previous CEOs, acting CEOs of Eskom. My understanding is that it was a card system based on a yellow card and a red card, and if there was a certain number of yellow cards, then a red card followed, and that resulted in dismissal or similar disciplinary action. Our analysis of this system is that it resulted in numbers being not accurately disclosed and plants being run far harder with known defects in order to avoid the negative consequences. We are talking about a completely different approach where there will be variable pay that is linked to performance. This is common practice, as you will be aware, in the private sector. So there will be a base pay, but then a variable pay component rewarding extraordinary performance, but also resulting in pay being at risk if certain performance targets are not met. And our human resources colleagues are hard at work putting in place exactly this system. I think if we can address Ms. Payton's question on our approach to planned maintenance. In the period leading up to elections, we will be cutting back on some of our short-term maintenance. And this is in order for us to restore both our pumped storage levels as well as our diesel levels in order to provide exactly the added resilience to the system that the minister was referring to earlier. But we will not bring back units that are on long-term outages earlier than planned. We will continue with our program of around about 5,000 megawatts being on planned maintenance. That is the program, and we are going to stick to that. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Andre. The second round of questions, I see Sophie Mukwena, you'll be the first person to ask. Kaya Sitolo, you'll be the second. Tolani Mbanjwa, Newsroom, you'll be the third. And Edward John Bottomley, you'll be the fourth. Sophie, can you ask your question, please? Go ahead.
Sophie, can you ask your question, please? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just want to find out from Minister Pravin Gordhan. In 2007, the then president of South Africa and the president of your ruling party, Thabo Mbeki, made a statement in Bloemfontein at the infrastructure conference, first admission in 2007, that South Africa was heading for disaster in terms of electricity supply because the ANC-led government did not anticipate electricity demand that might be putting pressure on supply because of access to particularly previously disadvantaged Black Africans who were excluded in the grid. And the plans were afoot to ensure that this matter is addressed. Almost 20 years down the line, we are in a worse situation. What has the ANC-led government been doing? Because this problem was identified, you needed a planning, and you needed, as part of the handover from one administration to the other, to have prioritized this matter. What has the ANC-led government been doing? Because it's not a different party. Two, in February 2019, on the margins of the AU summit in Ethiopia in Addis Ababa, when it was announced that there's a stage 5 load shedding in South Africa, the current president of the Republic, President Cyril Ramaphosa, said he was shocked and he was going back and he is going to ensure that this matter is addressed because it is going to affect investment. Why should the investors, particularly international investors, trust the Department of Enterprises in resolving this matter? Shouldn't Eskom go back to the minerals and energy? Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie Mkwena. Kaya Sithole, please come in. Kaya, you're good to go. Kaya, I've just unmuted you, but I see you still muted. Okay, let me take Xolani Mbanjwa. Kaya will come in at the third. Xolani, can you speak? So
thank you very much, Richard.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard. Minister Gordhan, your response at that you do apologize to the South African public, but you know, you're not taking responsibility because you do not operate the plans. You just asked tough questions and you demand assurances. Is this the right approach at a time when businesses and the public are looking for leadership that is going to take responsibility for what is happening at Eskom at cabinet level? That's my question to you. And my question to Mr. Terreite, the second question is, this variable pay that is linked to performance that you are introducing, has it passed with the unions represented at Eskom? We know unions have been very vociferous. They can down tools at any time. We've seen instances of that in the past. Have unions been brought in to buy into this variable approach when it comes to pay? Because now that deals with issues of pay in the workplace. Please, if you can answer that question, and whether you expect the unions to just buy in on this issue that you are now introducing at Eskom involving workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Xolani. Kaya, I've still unmuted you. You just need to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question. If you're not, you will ask Edward. Kaya Sithole. Okay, let's move to Edward John Bomley. You were set to ask a question. Edward? Okay, I think they've gone. Miriam Isa, can I take you so long?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Miriam.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is for Mr. De Ruyter. In his statement, Minister Gordhan said that as South Africans go to the polls, there will be no load shedding. And then he added, unless there is an unexpected event. We've seen quite a lot of unexpected events given the breakdowns of the plant, the old plant, and the problems that have been building up. Can you say with any confidence that there will be no load shedding up to and during the elections?
Thanks, Miriam. Sweet and short. Minister and Andre, Minister, can you deal with some of the questions, starting with Sophie Mkwena? Thanks.
Yes, no, Ms. Mkwena is right that ANC governments over the years have been aware that there was going to be a challenge as far as electricity was concerned. And as my memory serves me, at this point in time, the hope was that the private sector would invest in electricity generation, and that didn't quite happen. Therefore, in the early 2000s, government decided that Medupi and Kusile would start. Initially, these were what we call 6 packs. They were later expanded in their scope. And of course, we now know that both those projects, because of lack of skills in Eskom and other reasons, including corruption by the very people that have been mentioned in previous questions, resulted in both these power stations having design faults, having the wrong kind of boilers, and all of which, and of course, overruns in terms of time and in terms of cost. And that is something that is now the subject of, let's call it a rectification process, where also adjustments have to be made to Medupi and Kusile. And so the hope that these power stations, which I think are supposed to give 4,200 megawatts each, would help us to overcome the energy constraints, did not actually materialize. The second question is a repeat of what was asked already. And in that particular regard, I think we're all aware of the fact that the late Jabu Mabuza took responsibility for both the information placed before the president, but also the risks placed before him. And as a consequence, he then resigned a little later. But that's part of history. I think we've got to deal with what we have at the moment and do the best we can until we have additional megawatts added to the system in order to supplement that which the current generation fleet is able to give to us. Kolani's question, of course we take responsibility, but we take responsibility in the sense that it is our responsibility to correct the situation. It's our responsibility to understand what's going wrong. It's our responsibility to do the best we can to get the best out of the Eskom fleet, but also out of the Eskom staff as well. There was a question on the chat group earlier on, which says, "Yeah, we've heard this stuff about state capture." I don't think you even know what kind of damage state capture does until you get into an institution. So ask the commissioner of SARS, what is it that he inherited post-state capture in the South African Revenue Service? Ask Minister Mbalula what he has to deal with in Prasa as a consequence of what has happened there. Today, even in the context of Transnet or Denel or many of the other state-owned entities, we don't only have financial damage, as I said earlier on, but the whole culture within an institution is corrupted. And it's well known, you can change the financial architecture, you can change the organizational structure, but it's well recorded by those who are knowledgeable. But to change a culture is extremely difficult. And I'm sure the SABC is another instance where something similar has happened. And I'm not sure what progress has been made in that particular regard as well. So state capture is not just the word state capture. It has massive implications in this particular regard for the kind of repair work that needs to be done. Mr. Director can tell you about his level of confidence and the confidence that the Eskom management has in the undertakings that we are giving at this point in time. But all I am saying at the moment is that we are going to give it 150% of our energy and diligence to ensure that we meet the goals that we've set out for you this evening. And if we don't, we'll come back and tell you why, and be frank with you in that particular regard as well.
Thanks, Minister. Andre?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Minister. Just quick responses on Kolani's questions. The variable pay that we're introducing is not going to be for members of the bargaining unit. So this is not intended to change the conditions of service for union members. this is specifically aimed at a small group of very senior executives in the generation management team. So to drive the right behavior there and ensure that the right incentives and disincentives are in place. So we don't expect any challenges from the unions in this regard. As far as Miriam's question is concerned, one makes predictions and forecasts about the stability of the system, as we've seen, with some humility, and there's always a residual risk. So can we give you a cast iron guarantee? I think the minister has just addressed that in some detail. But part of the reason why we have load shedding right now is in order for us to replenish our reserves, both pumped storage as well as our diesel reserves at our OCGT plants, so that we can maintain an adequate reserve buffer precisely in order to cater for these unforeseen events and to ensure that from the best of our ability that there will be no load shedding during election day. And that is why taking the decision to implement load shedding right now was made specifically with the view of securing supply and capacity during election day. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks. Let me take the last round quickly from the chats. Lames, Omar G, FAIN24, what is the most updated electricity availability factor and in EAF? And in terms of keeping the lights on over elections period, will Eskom request supply interruption to industry? Another question from Matthew, news editor at Times Live. Minister Gordhan, please, can you provide more details on that power station situation regarding the leaking piping that wasn't attended to? When did this happen? Which power station was it? Maybe Andre can maybe give clarity more on that one about the leaking pipe incident that Minister talked about. Colleagues, let me end there. Minister and Andre, can we just finalize those two questions, and because we have run out of time. Thank you.
Andre, if you can go first and then I'll round up.
Thank you very much, Minister. So the current EAF is disappointingly low. It varies between 64 and 65%, which is a significant way off from where we'd like it to be. We have an existing program in place with the support of the energy intensive users group to, from time to time, request these users to curtail their usage during peak hours. We're very grateful for their cooperation and support to enable us to navigate peak hours, particularly when demand is very high. They are very helpful in enabling us to manage the system. So we are very grateful for that. As far as the power plant is concerned that the minister referred to, this was Unit 1 at Kusile, where for a period of about 2 hours, a warning light on the control panel was flashing, indicating a low oil level. And the operator in question, which, as the minister indicated, has led to disciplinary action, saw fit to ignore that particular warning signal for a period of 2 hours, and that then led to the unit tripping. Thank you, Minister.
So there was a question, I think, either on the chat group or on the Q&A about nuclear. You might be aware that the Department of Minerals and Energy has a process underway. I think it's an RFI on the nuclear question. Nuclear is also very much part of the IRP 19 framework for South Africa. And I suppose when the department is ready, they will keep the public informed. Secondly, we are asking about some of the things that Eskom has achieved, but I've just got hold of some numbers. Since 2013, 85% of households in South Africa have undergone the electrification process, which is a responsibility of Eskom, and it's funded through funds that are provided by the DMRE. And this is happening at the rate of 100,000 houses or households per year. During the course of this, 90% of villages in South Africa have been connected to the grid. And as we stand at March 2021, some 6 million households have been connected to electricity through this process. However, there are still challenges as far as in some of the areas illegal connections are concerned, payment for electricity is concerned, the manner in which the free basic electricity is actually implemented in different parts of the country. But this is part of the promise that the governing party has made over the years. And equally, in the manifesto of the governing party, it makes a commitment to ensuring that it fights corruption and wastage. And I think this is something that we are talking about at this particular point in time. And equally importantly, the supply of electricity to different parts of the country is an important objective that has been set as far as the governing party's manifesto is concerned as well. So in sum, what we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding many of the complimentary things that are being said on the chat group, that firstly, there will be a recovery from load shedding if the plan that we've put forward to you works well, and there's a high level of confidence that it will. Secondly, that the period of the elections, the 1st of November, slightly before and thereafter, will not be interfered with in any way as far as elections go. Thirdly, that new and extraordinary things need to happen within Eskom, and the board and the management this afternoon have been asked to look into these matters and to ensure that there's a different culture and a different tempo to the operations within Eskom itself. And fourthly, there's no doubt that a lot more megawatts need to be added to South Africa's energy system, be it through gas, be it through nuclear and at some date in the future, be it through renewables of different types. And there's a lot of money that is waiting to be invested in renewables. Some institutions tell us up to 120 billion rands can be invested, which can make a huge difference. And that is why, as we go to COP26 as a government, the just energy transition process, in which Eskom has played an important part in designing the just component for workers and for the communities that are actually impacted, will play an important part in attracting funding to South Africa as well. And lastly, the IEC will be given every cooperation by Eskom in order to ensure that the elections are a success and that electricity is not a disruptive factor in the days to come. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Minister. Eskom leadership led by Andre de Ruyter. Thank you very much, members of the media.
Well, certainly a very interesting press briefing there, Francis, where the Minister of Public Enterprises and the Eskom CEO talking about the current situation, load shedding. Now, we've heard that Koeberg is expected to come back onto the grid, but the full output will only be experienced in the next 48 hours. But so far, the breakdowns that have currently amounted to 14,957 megawatts is exactly where we are now. Just perhaps a breakdown to our viewers why we are where we are and how good or bad it's looking.
Well, that was a request that the Minister, Pravin Gordhan, and the CEO, Andre de Ruyter, would explain how we got to this point. I think what they have made very clear is what many suspected, that the load shedding right now is being intensified so that Eskom can stockpile, so that Eskom can do whatever it can to keep the lights on election day. Now, remember, if there's load shedding on elections day, that could lead to claims of unfairness, of people not being allowed to exercise their democratic right. That would be very detrimental to the democratic process. So both men are confirming that what's being done now is about Monday, saying that the lights will be on Monday unless there's some extraordinary event. So there's always that caveat, but really doing everything they can. And yes, looking at the history, Kusile, Medupi, these big power plants that were meant to make things better. The minister talking about the design defaults, blaming a lot on state capture, getting some flack for that, but saying that the fallout has been huge even on the culture at Eskom, which needs to change.
All right, so we'll be back with more news after the break. And of course, there's still an update on sports with Willie coming up, but do stay with us.